Have you ever felt like you're carrying a weight you can't see? It's not on your back or in your hands, but right here, inside. The tension, the constant struggle to control life. What if the key to finding peace is letting go? In today's video, I'm going to share a deeply personal journey, one that might feel familiar to many of you. It's a story about embracing life by surrendering control. It's about understanding that sometimes, the less we fight against the current, the more life can flow effortlessly toward us. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or uncertain about what's next, this story is for you. Join me as we dive into the powerful transformation that comes from letting go of resistance and trusting the process. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. So, if you're ready to release the tension and let life guide you, hit play and let's begin this journey together. There's a weight you've been carrying, and maybe you don't even realize it. It's not the kind of weight you can see, nor the kind that settles on your shoulders or in your hands. It's not something anyone can point to, not something anyone could touch. But it's there. You feel it. It presses on your chest, tightens your jaw, and makes everything feel just a little too heavy to bear. It's the kind of weight that hides behind your eyes, beneath the surface. It lingers in the quiet spaces of your mind, in the split-second pauses between thoughts when everything should feel calm, but doesn't. You're not truly at rest. You're bracing. Holding your breath. Waiting for the next thing that will demand more of you. It's resistance. The kind that doesn't scream or shout, but sits in the back of your mind, quietly pulling your attention away from the present moment, whispering that everything might go wrong if you don't stay alert. It's the little things that add up, the tiny tensions in your body that accumulate over time. You've gotten used to it, to the tightness, to the perpetual feeling of being on edge. You wake up in the morning already bracing for the day. You check the time, the emails, the weather, your to-do list. Your mind races ahead, preparing for what's to come. There's a subtle fear that floats in the background, an unspoken thought that whispers, what if it doesn't go right? What if something goes wrong? You expect the worst before it even happens. You overthink the small interactions. You rehearse your words, your actions, your next move. Everything is calculated, controlled. Even your breath is measured, as if by controlling it, you can control the outcome. But despite all your efforts to anticipate, the world keeps moving in unpredictable ways. Somewhere, you learned that surrendering wasn't safe. Letting go meant losing control, and control was your armor. You believed that staying in charge was the only way to keep the chaos of life at bay. But the harder you try to control things, the more you realize that life slips through your fingers, your body tenses in response to life's unpredictability, and you begin to fear the idea of being unprepared. The tension becomes second nature, something you don't even notice anymore. It's always there. In your posture, in your thoughts, in the way you hold yourself. It's the price you pay for trying to keep everything together. But what if this resistance is actually what's slowing everything down? What if the more you try to control, the further you push yourself away from the very thing you desire: peace, happiness, flow? One evening, as you sat alone, scrolling mindlessly through your phone, something shifted. You came across a video, one of those self-help clips that usually blended into the background of your daily routine. But this time, something about the speaker's words caught your attention. Life doesn't need to be wrestled into place, they said. It doesn't respond to pressure the way we've been taught. Sometimes, things start working when you stop fighting them. Not because you give up, but because you let go. The words felt like a punch to the gut, but in a way that stirred something deep within you. It was as if a door opened, and for a brief moment, you saw what lay behind it. You saw that the weight you'd been carrying wasn't really your burden to bear, that maybe all the effort you'd put into control and resistance wasn't leading you anywhere. You'd been fighting for so long, trying to make everything perfect, trying to ensure that nothing would go wrong. But you couldn't force life to follow your script. You couldn't force the river to flow in the direction you wanted. The harder you tried, the more the current pushed back, threatening to drown you in the process. For the first time in a long while, you felt a wave of relief. It wasn't a solution or an answer, it was just a moment of quiet truth. The more you resisted, the more stuck you felt. And maybe, just maybe, the answer was not in controlling, but in letting go. But the question remained, how could you do it? How could you stop resisting when everything in your life had taught you to do the opposite? The next morning, you woke up earlier than usual. You'd been practicing meditation recently, trying to calm the noise in your head, trying to teach yourself to relax. But this time, something was different. You sat down on the edge of your bed, took a deep breath, and closed your eyes. The first thing that came to your mind was a list of all the things you needed to do: work, emails, appointments, social obligations. The usual list that never seemed to end. But you stopped. You took another deep breath. In. Out. You asked yourself, what if I didn't have to control this moment? What if I just let the day unfold, without trying to force it into something it wasn't? It felt strange, almost uncomfortable. There was a voice in your head telling you that letting go meant you were giving up, that you wouldn't get anything done if you didn't push forward. But the more you sat with that thought, the more you realized how much of your life had been driven by fear, fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of not being enough. In that stillness, a simple thought emerged: maybe I can trust life. Maybe I can trust that things will unfold as they're meant to. You stood up, slowly, your body still stiff from the habit of resistance, but you tried something new. You smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, tentative expression. But it felt like a small surrender, a letting go of the constant expectation that everything had to be perfect. You walked to the kitchen, made yourself coffee, and allowed yourself to enjoy the moment. You didn't rush. You didn't check your phone immediately. You just let yourself be present. And for a fleeting moment, you realized that you hadn't overthought or planned for the day ahead. That small moment of surrender felt freeing, like you had unlocked a tiny piece of yourself that had been trapped for far too long. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As the days went by, you tried to carry this new mindset into the rest of your life. But it wasn't easy. The tension inside you was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. You'd find yourself reverting to old habits, overthinking, controlling, planning every moment. But each time you did, you reminded yourself, it doesn't have to be this way. You started noticing how often you resisted things, not just in your actions, but in your thoughts. You resisted the uncomfortable moments. You resisted the uncertainty of not knowing how things would turn out. You resisted the quiet, peaceful moments because you were afraid they wouldn't last. But as you continued to practice letting go, you began to feel the difference. The moments of resistance started to feel less familiar, and the moments of flow, of quiet acceptance, started to feel more natural. It was like a muscle that had never been used before, and with each small act of surrender, it grew stronger. The more you allowed yourself to release control, the more you realized how much easier it was to breathe. You stopped fighting life. And in doing so, you allowed life to meet you where you were. The thing about change is that it's never as simple as it sounds. Letting go isn't just about stopping yourself from controlling the future. It's about confronting all the things inside you that have been silently driving your behavior for years. You thought it would be easy. You thought you could just let go, release your grip on control, and feel instant peace. But instead, you found that the more you tried to surrender, the more the deep-seated fears and insecurities began to surface. There were moments when you'd sit in silence, attempting to meditate or reflect, and suddenly, the old voices would rise. Those familiar voices that told you that you weren't enough. That if you weren't constantly working, constantly striving, you'd be left behind. That if you stopped managing every tiny detail of your life, it would all fall apart. The pressure to be perfect, to do everything right, to keep everything under control, was so ingrained in you that it wasn't just an external force, it had become part of who you were. Letting go felt like an enormous risk, a leap into the unknown. One evening, you found yourself sitting in your car after a long day, your hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel. The thought of letting go felt terrifying. What if you failed? What if you let go and things didn't work out? What if you couldn't handle it? But in that moment, a soft voice inside you whispered, what if you let go, and everything falls into place? You closed your eyes, letting out a deep breath. Your hands loosened their grip on the wheel, and for the first time, you felt the tension in your chest begin to melt. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but you realized something important. Letting go wasn't about being fearless. It was about being willing to face those fears and move forward anyway. A few days later, you decided to take a walk in the park. The weather was warm, and the sun filtered through the trees, casting shadows that danced along the path. You had no particular destination in mind, you just walked, each step slow, deliberate, and grounded in the present. It was during that walk that you realized something profound. You'd spent so much of your life trying to outrun stillness. You filled your days with noise, with tasks, with distractions, anything to keep your mind from resting, anything to keep the quiet at bay. You were afraid of what might come up if you stopped moving, if you allowed yourself to just be. But now, as you walked without an agenda, you felt the stillness slowly creeping in, and instead of resisting it, you embraced it. You allowed the silence to wrap around you, and in that silence, you felt something inside of you shift. It was as though a part of you had finally stopped fighting. You allowed yourself to simply be. It wasn't an earth-shattering revelation, but it was significant. You didn't need to be constantly busy, constantly achieving, constantly moving forward. The world was moving just fine without your need to control it. And for the first time in a long while, you didn't feel like you had to chase after it. As the days turned into weeks, you found yourself becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of letting go. It was still hard. Some days, the urge to control, to overthink, to plan everything meticulously, would rise up again. But you were learning to catch it, to recognize it for what it was, old habits, old fears. You were learning to say, I see you, but I won't let you drive me today. One evening, as you sat down to dinner, something extraordinary happened. You weren't overthinking. You weren't worried about the future. You weren't anticipating what might go wrong. You were simply eating. The food tasted more vibrant, more alive. The act of eating, once just a mundane task, became a moment of pure presence. You felt grateful for the meal, for the simple joy of nourishment. In that moment, you realized how much of life you had been missing because you had been too busy chasing something that wasn't real. You had been chasing control, chasing perfection, chasing a life that wasn't yours to command. But now, as you slowly started to let go, you began to see the beauty in what you had, in the simple, quiet moments that had always been there, waiting for you to notice them. It was clear now, the more you let go, the more life unfolded naturally. The more you stopped fighting, the more space there was for peace and clarity to emerge, but there was still more to learn. And even though you had come so far, you knew there would be moments when you would be tempted to revert to old habits, when the fear of the unknown would rise again. It wasn't about perfection, it was about the practice of letting go, day by day. It was inevitable. After weeks of feeling the flow of life, something unexpected happened. Life threw you a curveball. A situation that you hadn't planned for, a challenge you weren't prepared to face. The old voice of resistance rose within you like a tidal wave. You could feel the tension in your body as your mind raced, trying to strategize, to find a way out, to control the outcome, you found yourself slipping back into old patterns, overthinking, planning, obsessing over every detail. For a moment, it felt like all the progress you'd made had been undone. The grip of control was so familiar, so comforting, and you were tempted to believe that this was the only way to make it through, but then, in the middle of the panic, you remembered something. Letting go doesn't mean giving up, it means trusting the process. You paused. You took a deep breath. And you chose to let go of the need to control. You chose to trust that things would unfold as they needed to, that you didn't have to have all the answers right now. You let go of the fear, and for the first time in days, you felt the tension in your body begin to ease. The situation didn't resolve immediately, but something inside you shifted. You weren't fighting it anymore. You were just being with it. And in that moment of surrender, you found a quiet sense of peace. Over the next few months, your life began to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but you learned to dance with life instead of fighting against it. You learned that the flow wasn't something you had to force, something you had to chase. It was something that came when you stopped resisting. You became more present, more connected to the people around you, more attuned to the beauty in the simple moments. You found yourself smiling more, laughing more, living more fully in each moment. And with each passing day, the flow of life felt more natural, more effortless. You didn't have all the answers. You didn't have a perfect plan. But you didn't need one anymore. You had learned to trust life, to trust the process, and most importantly, to trust yourself. It had been months since you first started this journey of letting go, of learning to release the grip of control and trust life's flow. And while the path had been challenging, the transformation within you was undeniable. There were moments of doubt, moments where the old fears would resurface and whisper in your ear, but you had learned to recognize them for what they were: old patterns, lingering thoughts, remnants of the life you once lived. But now, something had shifted. You could feel it in your bones. There was a softness in you that hadn't been there before, a gentle strength that came from surrender, from embracing what was instead of fighting for what you thought should be. Life no longer felt like something you had to struggle against. It no longer felt like a series of obstacles to be overcome, a race to win, or a puzzle to solve. It was just life. And that was enough. The more you let go, the more space you made for the present moment to unfold naturally. One afternoon, as you sat by a lake, watching the water ripple gently in the breeze, you reflected on how far you had come. The weight you had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of peace that seemed to radiate from the very core of your being. The tension, the tight grip on everything, your expectations, your fears, your doubts, it was all slipping away. You were no longer holding on to the future with clenched fists. You weren't holding on to the past with regret. You weren't even holding on to yourself with fear. You were simply present. In that moment, there was no need for control. No need for perfect answers. No need for constant striving. You felt the breeze against your skin, the warmth of the sun on your face, the stillness of the world around you. It was all just enough. You were enough, and for the first time in your life, you realized that letting go had brought you something you never could have forced into existence: freedom. Freedom to be yourself, to experience life as it was, without the constant pressure to mold it into something it was never meant to be. You had spent so many years trying to protect yourself from the unknown, from the possibility of failure, from the fear of disappointment. But now, as you sat by the lake, you understood something fundamental. Life wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be lived. You didn't need to control everything. You didn't need to plan every moment or worry about what came next. You didn't need to have all the answers. What mattered was that you were here, in this moment, exactly as you were meant to be. And that was enough.